You're listening to Aphrodite, My Love, a novel by Quint F. Kamba. Letters 5 to 8. Letter 5, The Wonder Years. Can you remember where you were around the beginning of 1978, Aphrodite? I really loved Guello back then. It was the biggest city I had ever been, after Seleucia. It was such a lovely clean town with a nice warm climate and really not as hot as Rockford, where I came from. It is uncanny how life quickly settled down in the new place. The plot was at the end of the road called Cranbourne Road in Kingston Park, the last house on the road before the start of farms heading east, I guess all the way to Seleucia. To the south of the road was virgin scrubland and the Seleucia railway line that ran eastwards 200 yards alongside Cranbourne Road. It's even weirder how in all that time I didn't think about my father even once. Since the debacle years back when in my 3rd grade he had promised to fly us to England to live with him, and we had said goodbye to all our friends at Rockford Primary School, only for him to fail to keep his promise. We had gone back to the school full of shame. My anger and distrust of him had been beyond compare, and I had sworn to never think about him or seek him out ever again. With life at the plot so good, I had practically adopted myself to Uncle Ben and Mamamdala. They were so kind to me and treated me just like one of their own. No difference. Soon after moving, my cousins had been enrolled into Cecil John Rhodes and Chaplin High School, which had recently started admitting non-white pupils. Mamamdala started teaching at Cecil John Rhodes Primary School as well. For a couple of months, I was still not going to school but was enjoying life at the plot very much. I worked in the garden with one of the workers most days, watering the garden, breaking the ground and planting vegetables like lettuce, tomatoes and carrots which Mamamdala sold to one of the supermarkets. Tim, I think it was. Why am I telling you all this, Aphrodite? Hear me out please, darling Aphrodite. Show some mercy. Don't judge too harshly please, my love. Be kind to me just once. I've got no fight left in me anymore. I used to be sure I knew what love was. I'm not so sure anymore. Love broke me. Totally. Let me tuck my face over your shoulder in your sweet-smelling hair. And weep for a moment. Wipe the tears off my eyes with the palm of your hand. Let your gentle touch soothe my pain. Say something nice to me. Tell me you forgive me. Tell me if things had been different, perhaps in another world, in another time, another life, another place, maybe you could have loved me. We could have grown old together and been the happiest couple that's ever lived. I know this is asking too much, but I really just want to throw everything but the kitchen sink at you. Tell you everything, leave no stone unturned, so that you might look at it in your own time and be the judge of why Nkosi was so besotted with you. Infatuated, you said to me once, remember that? What led this boy to become such a pain in the neck to you? Maybe just one thing. One line in this story might make you forgive me. Every time I think about you my heart stops. Melts into a gloopy puddle on the floor. It's bloody mess, Aphrodite, my love. I was loving my life at the plot so much that I completely forgot about all my problems. I forgot who I really was and where I had come from. I no longer thought about the past, nor did I think about the future. Even though the war was still going on, it was something that had happened to me a long time ago. Everyone still went to church in Nkoba, but the car was always too full and I started missing church and soon had forgotten all about Portia. Instead, on Saturdays when I wasn't working in the garden at the plot, I went exploring, just walking around the amazing neighborhood past beautiful homes, with high hedges and gates with signs that said, "Beware of the dog." I think we were the only African family in that area in 1978. You'll be surprised what you can find when you just walking around aimlessly. Once I found a whole tennis racket just discarded outside someone's gate. What I liked about it the most was that you could walk for miles and never see a single soul. Everyone stayed in their houses behind their shiny beware of the dog gates. The odd car that passed by paid no attention whatsoever to a small barefoot African boy of 11 exploring in their neighborhood. Scouting, gathering information for when the guerrillas would come and I would show them where the enemy lived. I already knew what I would say if they'd stopped and asked me what I was doing there. I would just say, "No speak English, Barsopo Loinja," and I was sure they'd just let me go on my merry way. One Saturday, whilst everyone had gone to church, my older cousin who'd started at school at Chaplin High said he'd made friends with this white boy called Paul, and they were going to explore a mineshaft at the top of the copy. This was a small mountain, or large hill if you like, that rose at the edge of the suburb on the road to Seleucia, a couple of miles from the plot. My cousin gathered up some old ropes that we had in the toolshed and a torch, and we were all set to go and explore the mine shaft. We tracked through the scrubland, which was full of acacia trees and tall dry elephant grass. We reached the kopje from the east and started ascending. It was an easy ascent, but we had to be careful not to step on snakes and get killed before even getting to the mine shaft. Well, Aphie, you can imagine I was very excited. I was just thinking, how wonderful it would be if we found some gold nuggets in there, like on Gunsmoke, you see, if you remember that TV show. On the way up the hill, we were surprised to see some lemurs up on the trees. They came forward to watch the two strangers coming up their hill, and then vanished among the branches as we got closer. They had such pretty striped tails. I kept thinking, if we caught a few, they would make really good winter hats. At the top of the kopje, we found an overgrown path that cut along the middle ridge of the kopje. The whole hillside was densely covered by thick bushes and tall trees, and, was it not for that path, we would have really struggled to make it to the other end of the kopje. The kopje was not that long, about 300 yards or so, and we got to the other end pretty quickly. There we found the mine shaft. It was sealed with long concrete slabs about 30 feet by 30 feet across. In one corner of the slab, someone had smashed the slabs right through, so there was a hole big enough to fit a fully grown man with ease. The damage to the slab had discolored to the same color as the rest of the slab, so I figured it had been done a very long time prior. To me, it was proof that someone else had been there and tried to find gold nuggets, just as we were going to try and do. My cousin Zamani threw a small rock and we listened to hear it hit the bottom. Nothing, no sound, not a dicky bird. He tried a larger rock, no sound either. The mine shaft had to be really deep, and I saw Zamani's face darken with worry for the first time since setting out on this doomed escapade. By the time the white boy arrived, we had gathered enough information about that hole, were practically experts on it. The white boy was about the same age as my cousin, 15 or 16, and looked quite friendly. I had never seen a real white boy up that close before, and I was intrigued to see that, apart from his pale skin, blonde straight hair and blue eyes, he was just like us, just a normal kid. He joked around with my cousin and finally came up with a plan. It was the funniest thing I had ever seen. Just a normal interaction between a black boy and a white boy, as if we lived under the same sun, breathed the same air, and the colors of our skin and difference in our hair didn't matter one bit. Yeah, he did crazy things like push his hair back with the fingers of his hand, or kind of like shook his head a bit and his hair flew into place. His blue eyes were just like a doll's eyes. Apart from that, he was just a normal boy just like us. Paul decided he was going to tie the rope around his waist and we'd lower him down, slowly feeding the rope down. Even though the rope was not long enough to get him to the bottom, he would use the rocks in the mine shaft to step all the way down. I found myself liking this boy. He was very smart and brave. For a second though, I couldn't help wondering how a boy like him could turn into one of those terrifying soldiers, with long beard, shaggy red hair and piercing blue eyes that could see right through a human body like X-ray. And exactly at what point did they become so powerful that all Africans literally worship them like gods? For now though, he was just a boy, not much different from my cousin or even a low-life dingo like myself. My cousin Zamani took one end of the rope and crouched down, and I did the same behind my cousin so we could take the boy's weight should he slip and fall. Paul sat on the edge of the hole and lowered one foot through the black hole. He was wearing shorts and some fancy white tenderfoot, so his legs were bare. No sooner had he placed his foot in the hole than he jumped up screaming in agony. Within seconds, angry red wasps were buzzing past our ears, and we were up and running in every direction like dingoes on rocket fuel. The mission was aborted before it began. We couldn't really argue with the red wasps, especially the small ones that were attacking us. Their stings weren't as bad as the stings from the large red or black wasps, but the small red ones were super aggressive. A few of them would attack and leave you with several painful stings. Often they attacked the painful areas of the body like the lips, earlobes and eyes. I know because I had been stung many times as a kid back at the old farm in Selukwe. Once stung, the swelling went away in a day or two, but for the first few hours the pain was pretty unbearable. Once the disastrous escapade was aborted, we never mentioned the mineshaft again. I also never saw Paul again. Sooner or later I noticed my cousins were really enjoying school, and coming home with all sorts of wonderful stories. Zinel was playing a game called hockey, doing gymnastics and even swimming at school. Swimming at school? They had swimming pools at school. Who has a swimming pool in their school? It was insane, Aphrodite, totally insane. I started feeling quite bad and wondering about my future. For the first time in a very long time. Was that it for me? I was going to be a garden boy and work at the plot till I died. I had been so happy for so long. But I started feeling lonely and sad for no particular reason, and I would just find tears running down my cheeks for absolutely no reason at all. Sometimes it got triggered by even the slightest knock to the ego. Something was missing. Aphie darling, can you not have any pity for me? I started thinking if only I had real parents, things would be so much easier because I could just tell them what I wanted. But I blocked that thought hard and fast because it was a no-go area for my brain. There was too much pain down there. Instead, I figured if I saved up enough money I could take a bus to Bulawayo and walk the rest of the way to South Africa to work in the mines there. I could save up enough money and go back to school there. Why was South Africa always the answer for African Rhodesians? Or maybe I could work as a garden boy for some white people and earn enough money to continue with my studies, become a teacher, meet a nice girl and get married. I started thinking about school all the time, and the more I thought about it the sadder I got. But think of something hard enough and it happens. I thought about school when watering the garden, when I was digging the soil, when I was cleaning the chicken coop, when I was washing the cars. I thought about school, like I don't know, you think about food when you're hungry. One evening Uncle called me inside in front of everyone and announced some wonderful news. My sister's operation had been a success and she would be coming home soon. Once she was home he was going to find a school for us. He had actually seen one really good-looking school on his way to work at Gwelo Teachers College. The school was called Senga Primary School in Senga Township in Gwelo. I was so happy I cried tears of joy. I was so happy for so many reasons. My sister had been unwell since birth and now was fixed. I was sure that meant she would be much happier and would break her self-imposed vow of silence. I hoped that it would also help her with her grades, because she always got an F for every single subject. The teachers used to say the brother is so clever but the sister is an absolute drongo. This didn't please me at all, because I knew there was nothing wrong with her mentally. She had just been too traumatized as a child and just wasn't able to concentrate like I was. I was very protective of her. If anyone as much as breathed a bad word about her, they were dead. The only reason I was smart was because I had become proficient at rationalizing and compartmentalizing things, or blocking unwanted thoughts, or maybe even diverting painful experiences to something else. Maybe my serial falling in love with pretty girls was a way of diverting my pain onto something positive and beautiful. I'm not a psychotherapist, so I don't know, but regardless I was really happy with that stroke of good fortune. The thought of going back to school really lifted my mood. I was happy because going to school in town also confirmed that we had really become part of Uncle Ben's family, and were not going to be sent back to the farm in Selukwe or anywhere else for that matter. I was happy because I wasn't going to have to become a garden boy or a miner in South Africa. I was happy because I could finally see a brighter future. After that news, I knew I was truly the luckiest boy in the world. I was going to be alright, Aphrodite. Letter 6. The Wonder Year Senga Primary School. You know what, Aphrodite? You're the one person in the world that has been with me the longest time in my life. In my head, of course. You know everything about me, but I know so little about you. Okay. That's not true and that's not fair. So I'm sorry about that. The truth is we actually know so little about each other. We only spoke once. And even then it was only on the telephone. You probably only know me as that boy. And I know you as the love of my life. We lived on two separate worlds, Aphrodite. Moving in very disparate paths to different ends, and yet somehow our worlds collided. I don't know if it was by chance or if it was meant to be, but the thought of you is the eternal song of the universe that brings solace to my soul. Oh, the stars of the night sky, warriors of the past, my ancestors Amadlozi Ami Vatsamuvangu. Why did you deny me the love of this fair maiden? What crimes did I commit to forfeit such treasure? Did I ask for too much as a child? Did I wrong the gods in a past life that I should be punished so? If I must suffer, grant me just one wish. Give her the gift of a long, happy and rich life. When she picks a fruit from the tree of life and takes a bite, let her think only happy thoughts. I've been writing this story for this last couple of weeks, and in all the time I've only seen you in my mind's eye as I last saw you all those years ago. But when I wrote that last sentence, a flash of your image came to my mind as I feel you look like now. I can't believe you have streaks of gray in your gorgeous black hair. You're still as beautiful as the last time I saw you though, darling. Your skin is still flawless. Not a wrinkle to be seen anywhere. I'm glad, Aphrodite. That time has been kind to you. I know you have a younger sister. I used to see her with you sometimes. Tall, skinny, pretty little thing. I think she admired you, you know. I saw the way she looked at you. I never got to know her name, nor your friends' names. Sometimes I understand what you meant by infatuation. It's like I was tunnel-visioned. I only had eyes for you and nothing else, no one else mattered. Anyways, back to the happy carefree days of the late 70s, my darling Aphrodite. My sister returned from Pilo Hospital in Bulawayo all patched up and cured from a congenital heart issue. Uncle Ben was true to his word, kept his promise and got us enrolled at Senga Primary School. My excitement at starting school again, becoming a human being, becoming a child again, knew no bounds. We had to jump one hurdle though, pass an interview with the headmaster of the school. I couldn't tell you his name now because I can't remember it, but I can tell you that was my first interview ever and my only one for years after. Uncle Ben dropped us at the school on his way to work and gave us bus fare to find our own way back to the plot. Senga Primary School was a really pretty school about 7 miles southwest of Gwelo. In fact, it was the prettiest school I had ever seen, and this was judging it just from the entrance and gorgeous drive and roundabout with a flagpole in the middle. It was a busy school day. A Friday, I think, and my sister and I stood outside the headmaster's office waiting to be called in for the interview. As we waited, I managed to sneak past the entrance, which resembled a bridge, and noticed that the main school building was in the shape of a straight U. That is a U with straight sides, and the headmaster's office was to the left of the gap in the middle of the bottom of the U. Hope that makes sense. As we waited, a steady stream of teachers walked through the gap, and either turned left or right. I watched them all and studied their faces very carefully. I was assigning points as to whom I wanted to be my teacher and whom I didn't want. Soon a tall, skinny man with very good looks, but a very serious, stern face walked past us and looked straight at me. I felt like I had been punched in the chest with a sledgehammer, and I literally had to brace myself against the wall behind where we stood. Please don't let that man be my teacher, I prayed. Not him, not him, not him, please God. The headmaster's door opened and out came 3 teachers, 2 men and a lady. The lady instructed my sister to follow her. The 2 men looked straight at me, and one of them, holding a folder with a pen dangling from a string, said, looking straight at me, "Nkasaitan Gondoma, this way please." I remember thinking, these guys seem so friendly, they could easily be one of my many uncles. And please, I thought to myself, a teacher saying please. I liked that school already, and as long as that tall, stern, handsome teacher was not going to be my teacher, I wanted in. I won't bore you with the details of the interview, Aphrodite. I'll just tell you what happened. The 2 teachers whom I discovered from their introduction were the headmaster and the deputy head wanted me to redo the 4th year of primary school, because I had missed the 3rd term and also nearly 2 whole terms of the 5th year since it was already the middle of the 2nd term of the year. I thought about it for a minute. Let me see. I didn't start school till I was nearly 8. Working as a farm boy when others started at 6 or 7. If I dropped another year, I would be an old man with walking stick before I finished primary school. I thought to myself. I confidently told them that I was always top of the class, and even though I had missed all that time, I would have not trouble catching up and getting to the top of the class again. The 2 men looked at each other in disbelief. They tried to tell me I should not feel bad about having to repeat a year and that there was no shame in it, but I flat out said I was not going to repeat year, and if I had missed 2 years I still would not repeat them. I told them I was clever enough and smart enough to catch up, and I would do whatever it took to catch up, but I was not going to repeat the year. After that, the 2 teachers said they would make their decision and let my uncle know the result, but my sister would definitely have to repeat the year. I said that was fine by me, and she had already repeated a year, and that is why she was in my year even though she was a couple of years older than me. They thanked me for coming and let me on my merry way. That was it. Just like that I was back at school, baby, and straight into the 5th year like I had fought for. You would have been proud, Aphrodite. You have to admit, I was one hell of a tough little cookie back then. You won't believe what happened next. I turned up on Monday, and guess who came to collect me and take me to his class? Yep, you guessed right. The tall, stern, good-looking teacher I did not want. The universe is very strange. It tries to keep everything in balance, so it gives a little here and takes a little there. Never too much, never too little. Always a fine balance. I was finally back in school after almost a whole year on the streets, albeit with the wrong teacher. A new and exciting life had begun, and the future looked so bright. I was the luckiest boy alive, dancing on the moon, flying amongst the stars. Letter 7. The Wonder Years to Senga Primary School. We are getting so close to meeting Aphrodite. I'm so excited. 1 or 2 more chapters max. I can't wait to meet you. My hands are shaking as I type this. What is love? Is it the universe singing the most beautiful song ever sung? Is it the universe painting a picture of the most beautiful woman who's ever lived? Is it the unfathomable abyss of pain that can never be eased? Just what is it? Why do I love you so, Aphrodite? The grade 5 teacher at Senga Primary School, when I started on the following Monday, introduced himself as Mr. Mushinge. Immediately my mind was back at the old farm because his name was the name of a very common tree at the old farm. It was a fern that produced copious amounts of bean pods that looked just like ordinary runner beans. In the summer you could pick the pods, prise them apart and pull out the fleshy foamy lining of the pods and eat it. It tasted sweet and had a vanilla-like flavor to it. We never ate the beans though because we believed them to be poisonous. My sheep ate them though and never suffered any harm, so who knows. Mr. Mashenge took me to his classroom and introduced me so kindly tears started welling down my face. No one had ever said such nice things about me in my life before. He gave a brief summary of all my troubles in the Liberation War, and how my school had been shut down by Rhodesian soldiers. He finished by saying that I had not been in school for nearly a year, and that everyone should be nice and do everything they could to help me catch up. The kids in the classroom clapped their hands and everyone was inviting me to sit next to them. They weren't judging me, they were accepting me as one of their own. I was a person, I was actually somebody. You have to admire those African kids, Aphrodite. I think back then we suffered so much that giving another kid a bit of latitude came naturally. By the end of the week I was well settled at Senga Primary School, and had made so many friends. Those Senga kids were the greatest bunch of kids I had ever been to school with. It was a fairly small school which served the township of Senga nearby. Senga Township at about 7 miles from Gwelo was quite distant, and was quite a small township in comparison to Mkoba. At the end of the school day I would find my sister and we'd catch the bus back home to the plot. The bus dropped us at the big Selukwe roundabout and we walked the 2 miles to the plot on foot, first through the scenic homes of the hilltop suburb next to the mineshaft. It was the same suburb I had seen from the bus on the way into Gwelo for the first time all those years back. How far I had come, that this was now my neighborhood and I was cutting across there on my way home. The home still belonged to white people, but we were not afraid to pass through there anymore. Although the war was still being fought in the bush, everyone said the Africans were going to win. They said a lot of the whites were already leaving Rhodesia and emigrating to South Africa and Australia. Houses and plots were selling for a song, they said. That's how Uncle Ben ended up with that big house. That big white man who sold it to him was leaving for South Africa. Girl, I wish I was old enough to buy a house back then. A house for you and me, babe. At the end of the scenic route the road abruptly ended just before the hill with the mineshaft I talked about earlier. There was a narrow path that cut across the bush over the railway line onto Cranbourne Road. Opposite the plot with gum trees and horse stables. Yeah, horses, Aphrodite, big scary things 2 or 3 times larger than a donkey. You wouldn't catch me riding one of those things. I don't think those horses like African children much. They would run up to the fence neighing, shaking their heads, as if to say, what are you doing here? I liked cowboy horses on TV, but I wasn't very keen on the real ones. Walk past the horses, then past that lovely house with a beautiful garden owned by a colored man called Mr. Yarrow. Walk past the next place with a long drive and house that couldn't be seen from the road. Walk past the house of the white plumber who was married to a colored woman and had lots of vicious dogs. Walk past Jesus' house, the white guy who lived there with his old mom who had long brown hair and beard and blue eyes and looked just like Jesus. The guy, not the mom obviously. Walk a little further and you got to our house. Jesus was the guy who had shot a large black snake outside our house when we first moved. He'd shot its head clean off with a double-barrel shotgun. I understood the term I always heard on Gunsmoke, you son of a gun, after that. Those white guys were damn good with their guns for sure, they were real sons of a gun. At home we still followed the old tradition in the evening of dinner. Prayer time, then TV, then the news, then bed. The war was still going on and every night the white newsreader would recount the victories of the Rhodesian forces. So many of our boys were being killed every day, that sometimes I wondered if we would ever win the war. Our house was directly in the flight path of Thornhill Air Force Training Ground and every minute of the day there was a small plane taking off from the airbase, flying directly over the plot round, over the farm next door, and back to the airbase. They were training to fly and bomb the boys in the bush. Before I started school I had got tired of pointing the handle of my pickaxe or hoe at the planes and pretending to shoot them down. My cousin Zamani had explained that from up there, the pilots couldn't see us because we were the size of ants to them. I think it was round that time that General Peter Walls ordered the bombing of Kamoya, which killed hundreds of comrades including innocent women and children. So you can understand why I wanted to shoot those planes down every time I saw one. Besides, they were really noisy. At school I sat next to a boy called Paul. He was tall and dark, but very good looking. I didn't know it at the time, but he was the cleverest boy in the class. He reminded me of a friend of mine from Rockford, my old school, called Noah, who was always drawing. Paul was different, he always had his face buried in the pages of a book. After a while of observing him, I asked him what he was doing. Reading, he replied. What are you reading? I asked. He turned the cover of the book over, showing it to me, and said, Tom Swift. Well, why are you reading it? Did the teacher tell you to read it? Paul closed the book and studied my face for a couple seconds. I think he was trying to figure out whether I was joking or serious. He must have figured out that I was genuinely interested in finding out why he was doing something that he had not been asked to do by the teacher. After a couple of seconds he said, You don't just read because the teacher asked you to. You read to gain more knowledge, study to get better. Besides, the stories are really interesting. You can borrow this book if you like. I've finished it. You finished a whole book? I exclaimed with my mouth wide open. Yeah, and I'm starting another one, he said, pulling out a book as thick as a brick from his bag and plunking it on the desk in front of him. I picked up the copy of Tom Swift and held it with a certain amount of disbelief and consternation. I opened the book and started reading. Paul, I don't know half the words in this book, I exclaimed. Oh, you will need a dictionary then. Paul brought out his dictionary and showed me how to find a word I didn't know the meaning of. The dictionary contained an explanation of the word and gave examples of other words that meant the same thing but easier to understand. My head literally exploded with joy. You could learn things in your own time and not need to wait for the teacher to explain things to you. I immediately started reading Tom Swift, and from then on I was hooked on books. David Copperfield was a struggle. I had to look up so many words it took weeks to finish that book, and I never read it again. After that though, every book got easier and easier until I hardly needed to look at the dictionary. At the same time, my eldest cousin Mandla came back from boarding school in Bulawayo. He had finished his high school and was looking for something to do. He spent his days reading books as thick as the Bible, and of course once he finished with one, I devoured it voraciously. Books like The Immigrant by Howard Fast, Rich Man, Poor Man, Day of the Jackal, and any title I could get my hands on. Soon I had read the entire bookshelf of all of Uncle Ben's books. I even read The Hound of the Baskervilles, but I had to skip some pages because they were too terrifying and gave me nightmares. When I was done with every book, I turned to the Bible. I was starting to be sucked back into religion until I got to the Book of Revelations. I had never read such crazy nonsense in my life, and after that, I tended to make my own decision about my spirituality. All this reading wasn't without its own dangers. With great knowledge came great uncertainty. Questions without answers. Seeing the light through the darkness without understanding is dangerous. I was growing too big for my own boots. I was not out of the woods quite yet. I didn't know that quite yet. The universe gives and the universe taketh. Balance must be restored. The end of the term came quickly after a couple of months or so. I loved Senga Primary School. Mr. Mashenge turned out to be one of the most reasonable teachers I had ever had. He still was stern-looking, and in 3 years at the school I only ever saw him smile once. At the end of the term we had to write several tests, and out of the 42 pupils I came 28th. My worst performance since the first grade. But Mr. Mashenge said in front of the whole class it was incredible performance considering I had lost so much school time. The whole class clapped once again. This time instead of the tears, a smile ran across my old face. Those kids were just some of the kindest people I had ever come across. By the end of the year my position had come up to third, and it never went much lower than that, for the rest of the 3 years at Senga Primary. By the beginning of 1979 I had taken so much from the universe that something had to give. No one should be as happy and free as I was during those few years at the plot. A rip started forming in the fabric of space and time. I think it was becoming too economically unsound for Uncle Ben to keep giving us bus fare to get to school and back. So the solution he found was to put my sister and I up with one of my cousins who was working at Fletcher High School and living at the school compound in a 2-bedroom cottage. So during the week we'd stay with her and on Fridays get back to the plot. The Fletcher High School compound was just a short walk past the Fletcher Dam, across a small brook, and we're at my school 20 minutes max. The plot was probably a couple of hours on foot, so this made good sense. Except right from the start I sensed that there was a problem. I felt that my cousin really didn't want us there. And who could blame her? She was young, in her early 20s, wanting her independence and to enjoy her life, and all of a sudden she's got to look after 2 kids. Even if it had been myself, having somebody else's 2 kids forced to live with me, I would not have been too happy about it. No, not happy at all. I hated being a burden to people more than you can imagine, Aphrodite. I hated it so much, and when I saw how my cousin felt I was so ashamed of myself and felt so sorry for my poor sister. I felt like all our lives nobody wanted us, nobody loved us, and we were just being passed from one family to the next. They didn't know what to do with us, and wherever we went, we were not wanted and we were just ruining people's lives. We were such a burden on other people. I want to cry when I think about this, Aphrodite, because it hurts so much. It's not fair. I didn't do anything wrong to get the raw deal I got in life. What did I do to lose both parents? What did I do to be beaten up to a pulp? What did I do to lose the only real home I had ever known? Nothing, darling. Nothing. It's not fair. Anyway, what kind of a man beats up an 8-year-old? 8-year-olds are tiny. Just skin and bones, what's there to beat there? Sometimes I totally understand why you never wanted anything to do with me. Afy. I wonder, did you see through the veil to the real me? A complete wreck of a human being. A low-life vagabond with no past and no future. I don't blame you, darling. I probably would have refused to go out with me if I was you back then. I couldn't even think of anyone that could help us. If Uncle Ben and Mamamdala didn't want us at the plot, we were done for, finished. We would have to live on the street. Once again I started thinking about South Africa and working in the mines. By then I was 11 or 12, much more streetwise, but it still was a daunting journey for an 11-year-old to try and undertake. And besides, what would my sister do? I couldn't reach out to my father, because I had scratched him out of existence. Aphrodite, you're right. I'm not a human being. In fact, I don't think any person who loses both parents before the age of 12 can be a full human being either. Yes, they may look like one, have legs, arms, body, head, all that. But the broken wires inside the head is not how a human being should be. The sad thing is, there probably is no cure, no fix for it. You have to be there for your kid, until they can take care of themselves. The strength of any man comes from the love of a mother. What having no loving mother before the age of 12 does to a child is quite extraordinary. It shatters the human being and creates a caricature, a monster, and sadly that's really what I became. Honestly, Aphrodite, you have to believe me. I couldn't have become anything else. But my love for you was probably a cry for help. Help me, fix me, please, Aphrodite. It wasn't your call to fix me, so you didn't come forward to help. I don't blame you for it, my love. I raked my brain to try and figure out what I could have done wrong because I knew the first rule of survival. Rule number 1. Never annoy your benefactors. Rule number 2. Never get too comfortable. I was sure I had easily broken both rules and more. That's why things were starting to go wrong. And go wrong they did. The cottage was a little building situated on the last row of similar cottages south of Fletcher High School. It was the last in that row of 4 or 5 similar buildings, and was situated less than 50 yards from a sewage tank that looked like a dirty green swimming pool. Beyond it, going south, was an expanse of virgin forest that looked like no man had ever entered it and come back alive to tell the tale. It was complete wilderness and rather scary. I'm not sure how my cousin had lived there on her own, because I was scared and I was a bush boy who had lived on a farm in the middle of nowhere. This was an ominous-looking forest. There was just something I didn't like about it. The cottage was pretty simple, with a toilet and shower to the left and a room that became my room on the right opposite. The kitchen was directly behind the front door. Yes, you had to get out of the kitchen or main building to get to my room or the toilet. My cousin's bedroom was entered via a door from the kitchen. There was a back door that opened to the tiniest veranda in the history of housing. It looked like a toy house. The veranda looked out to the dark forest beyond. It was terrifying, and it didn't help that one boy from the compound had told me that a white lecturer in the college compound on the other side across the dam kept a leopard as a pet, and if it escaped we'd be dead. He also said, once, the police had found a dead body floating in the dam, but people still caught fish from there and were quite happy to eat it. When you're a kid you just make all sorts of connections, right? And I was convinced there had to be cannibals nearby, maybe in that dark forest. Even for a country bumpkin like I was and had grown up with all sorts of dangers like hyenas and the mysterious Toriro River lion, this sent shivers down my spine and I was really scared. The universe gives and the universe taketh. The universe was clawing back its fees for having been so good to me for so long. It was like a tax collector high on steroids. Not long after we moved to the compound, some boy called Titus started bullying my sister. A boy called Hendrix, who was in my class, kept feeding me the information. Hendrix was quite a friendly guy, really talkative, but most of the stuff he said was what you might call bullshit. I soon found out who Titus was. He was a boy from the compound and went to find out where he lived, but for a while the bullying stopped and I didn't pursue the matter any further. Life kind of returned to normal for a bit, but I wasn't enjoying life at the compound. It was a really bleak, desperate kind of life. My room was perfectly bare. I slept on a reed mat on the floor, with a couple of blankets, one for the bottom and another for the top. When winter came in May and June, it was bitterly cold in that room at night. We subsisted on a poor diet of polenta salsa and cabbage. Often there was no cabbage. Fortunately, my sister had invented a way of mixing salsa with water and sugar to make a meal, and that worked just fine. Once I found a bottle of ketchup and had that with my polenta. That probably was the most disgusting meal I had ever eaten in my whole life. After about the second mouthful, the salsa sticks to the roof of your mouth and refuses to go down. It's like the body is screaming, stop feeding me that shit. I don't know, maybe people did enjoy eating salsa and ketchup up and down the country, but it was a first for me and I hated it. The following week I brought back some rape seedlings and planted a vegetable patch. Soon we were able to pick the fresh vegetables and cook them ourselves. We'd go back to the plot on Fridays and get back to the compound on Sundays. Mamamdala would pack some meal, maize and vegetables for the week, but those only lasted a couple of days and we back on the polenta. Polenta is ground maize that's been depleted of all goodness. It's so perfectly white it looks like it's been bleached. On it has no taste and no flavor of any sort. Actually, it's just like starch. After a few months at the compound, I started getting very thin and very weak. All my joints started swelling and hurting like crazy. I was a nervous wreck. I started seeing things. At night just before going to sleep, the walls of my room would come alive. They looked like a muddy riverbed with creatures crawling all over it. Waiting till I fell asleep and then come crawling all over my lifeless body, munching my gaunt skinny bag of bones. I would be fine during the day, go to school and not even think about it. But when nighttime came, the demons came back to haunt me. I didn't know what to do. There was nobody I could really tell I was suffering. Rule number 3. Be the solution. Never burden your benefactors with your problems. I tell you, Aphrodite, the universe went on a vengeful rampage against me throughout 1979. It wasn't happy that I was sick and losing my mind at night, but Felix reported that Titus was bullying my sister again. This made me really angry and I went in search of him but could never find him. One Friday afternoon, a group of boys from the compound and I were walking back to the compound after school, just on the shortcut that went through a thicket before crossing over a small brook that fed the dam, when we heard a commotion behind us. A tall, aggressive-looking boy was shouting for us to stop. The boy was big, with a chest like a gorilla's and huge arms like stilts. He was already in grade 7. Well, I was in grade 6 and he wasn't in my class, and being so big I was quite certain he had to be in grade 7. Nkosi, you little shit. I'm going to break every bone in your body. And when I'm done, I'm going to kill your stupid sister and dump her body in the dam. The boy ranted at me, his eyes red with rage. Aphrodite, sometimes you don't need to be doing anything wrong. And somehow trouble just comes looking for you. What had I done wrong there? Nothing, right? I could tell the boy wasn't just threatening, he looked serious enough to do it. He certainly looked strong enough and big enough to break every bone in my body. Fortunately, he wasn't carrying a big stick or baseball bat, so if he was going to break me he would have to use his hands. I probably would have let him beat me until he got tired and left me alone. If he hadn't mentioned my sister. He shouldn't have done that. I suddenly saw red. I dropped my bag on the ground and clenched my fists. Time slowed right down. The sun was bright and warm. The sky was a perfect hazy blue. The bushes were green and the grass was waist-high and a sandy golden color. I focused on my foe as he came at me with such hate and ferocity I could hear him breathe like a bull. I waited for him to get closer, then I let him have it. I caught him on the chin. The big boy staggered backwards. "Mfana. Little boy. You done it now, I'm going to kill you," he bellowed from the corner of my eye. I could see the other boys had formed a semicircle round us and were gleefully chanting, "Kill him, Titus." One boy called Patrick, whom I thought was a friend because he looked a bit like Silence, a friend of mine from Rockford, was shouting, "Kill him, Titus." To my surprise, Hendrix, whom I thought was a two-faced duplicitous son of a gun, started shouting, "Hit him now, Nkosi. Hit him now." Titus had steadied himself and was taking his jersey off, presumably because he was too hot or something. I understood what Felix was shouting. It would be a good time to attack whilst his head was covered by the jersey he was taking off, but I wanted a fair fight, so I let him finish taking his jumper off. He came at me again, throwing punch after punch with those great big arms of his, but none landed on any part of my body. I blocked them all with my scrawny bony arms. My breathing was slightly elevated but steady. I felt like I could go on like that for hours. All that hard work on the plot was paying off. I was strong. I backed off the path into the grass, and not wanting to get bitten by a snake, I started throwing punches back and drove him back onto the path. Hey boys. Stop that. What's going on here? Stop that. Some old man got off his bike and stopped the fight. He came in between Titus and I and spread his arms out to stop Titus from coming at me. Titus was still ranting and raging about killing me. I have to tell you, Aphrodite, I was so grateful that old man turned up when he did. That boy put the fear of God in me. The fight was not resolved and I was sure it could have gone either way. Likely with me dead because he was big and strong and none of my punches had knocked him down. I had to walk the long way back to the compound, and my best friend at the time, a boy called Martin whose mum worked at the teacher's college, said I had put up a really good fight. He said that Titus was a big bully and he was glad I had stood up to him. I wasn't quite sure what he meant by stood up to him. The fight had not been resolved and there was sure going to be a follow-up of some sort soon. Martin was sure Titus would not bother me again. But I didn't believe him. That evening when I got back to the plot, I went and did something I'm not particularly proud of, Aphie, because it was a bit cowardly. No, it was very cowardly. I cut a metal rod of about 20 inches, fired it until it was red hot, and fashioned a beautiful assegai. All the time I was seeing one face, Titus's eyes red with rage. The workers at the plot asked me what I was doing and I told them straight up I was making a spear to kill a boy who was bothering my sister. They laughed and said I was crazy. It was no laughing matter to me though. But their lack of concern did make me change my strategy though. I wasn't going to attack the boy in cold blood, but only bring out the spear if he attacked me. What I wasn't going to let him do was kill my sister. That was a no-go area for me. When I was done hammering the rod into a nice spear, I filed the edges until they were razor sharp. Then I fitted a handle which had to be short enough so that the whole spear could fit in my school bag. 11 years old and already planning a murder, in self-defense mind you. Still not proud of that. But you tell me, what could I have done? Gone to tell the headmaster? That thought never entered my mind. I guess I wasn't that smart after all. The following Monday I was really nervous. I did not want to see that boy and I really did not want to have to kill him. To my surprise, the day passed without an incident. It wasn't until the middle of the week when I was starting to forget about the whole thing when Hendrix reported that Titus was looking for me. To my surprise, the day passed without an incident. It wasn't until the middle of the week when I was starting to forget about the whole thing when Hendrix reported that Titus was looking for me. I checked my bag and felt the handle of the spear before I answered with the viciousness of an angry black mamba. Looking straight at Hendrix, I said, tell him if he so much as touches my sister, I will cut his heart out and eat it. I'm a fucking Zulu and I'm not afraid to die. I banged the desk with both fists and I was foaming at the mouth. Really though, Aphie, I was scared shitless. It was all a show, but the spear in my bag gave me a strange kind of confidence. My whole body though was quivering with fear. I didn't want any of this stuff that was happening to me. Would I've used the spear? Without a fucking doubt. I waited for the fallout of my actions. For that bully boy to come and find me and let the inevitable happen. Senga Primary School was built right next to a remand for boys. A sort of jail for kids my age. I already saw myself there, in bright yellow and pink prison fatigues when I had killed the boy. I was only 11 and my life was going to be over soon. Perhaps I should just run away to South Africa, I thought to myself. The rest of the day I waited for him to show up. On the way home after school I was on the lookout for him, but he never showed. The week went by, then another, and before long, I started to not think about him so much. I still carried the spear in my bag until it made a hole in the bag, and someone noticed and asked what it was. I got away with lying that it was my pencil sharpener. At the weekend I made a leather sheath for it, and it remained safely concealed in my bag. During that time though, the nightmares continued and got worse. I couldn't concentrate or think anymore, so my grades started plummeting. The walls of my room pressed down on me and started whispering terrifying things to me. One night I woke up to find my stomach wide open and two talking jackals chomping on my entrails. I could see them clear as daylight, enjoying the contents of my stomach. Chomp, chomp, chomp they went. One of them turned to the other and said, "We did good tonight, Barbara. This one here tastes like chicken." The other replied, "Yeah, young and tender." I was watching the whole thing and I raised my hands up and said to them, "Do you mind? It's my body you're eating." As soon as they saw that I was alive, they just melted into the night. That wasn't the only nightmare that tormented me every night in that room. There was the regular being chased by a lion and getting shot by Rhodesian soldiers, being bitten by a black mamba. But the worst one was being carried off by a bunch of bare-naked tribal men with white skeleton paintings on their bodies to be sacrificed like a goat and eaten, somewhere in the depths of the forest beyond the little cottage. Slowly but surely, a dark cloud started descending over me whenever I was at that cottage, that even in the afternoons, even though the cottage was white, it had the appearance of being entirely black to me. The swelling on my joints and neck were now so large and visible to everyone, but no one said anything. I was in pain and having difficulty swallowing. I thought I was going to die, Aphie, and then I think I completely lost my mind. The last thing I remember was, it was dark and I was outside the back garden digging and talking to myself. I think some boys from school passed by and tried to talk to me, but I was too far gone. I was just rambling nonsense. I remember my cousin saying something to me. I can't tell you what. Of course I don't know for sure, but I think that there was black mold growing on the damp walls of my room and I must have breathed in the spores and got a severe infection and started hallucinating. To me that explains why I was worse at night when I was in that room. Either that or someone died in that room previously and their dead spirit possessed me. I don't actually completely believe in ghosts. I don't think that it's impossible that they do exist. I'll tell you a story about this later, I promise. I don't actually remember much more about 1979 and the Fletcher compound post my illness, except that my sister and I found ourselves permanently back at the plot and life was getting much better again. I also never saw bully boy Titus ever again. I still saw Hendrix in class, but we were not really friends anymore. I kind of felt sorry for him because once he had told me that in the village where he had grown up on the reserve, whenever they went out to herd cattle, older boys would violate the smaller boys, so they would basically not clean themselves to discourage the old boys from forcing themselves on them. Needless to say, I had left my breakfast on the side of a bush that morning. It was a pretty sickening image, but that reminded me of a situation back at the old farm when a psychopathic newly hired farm worker, of maybe 20 or 21, had got a whole bunch of us kids in his room at the worker's cottage. My brain really refuses to go any deeper, but I think bad things happened to someone there, because that farm worker suddenly vanished from the farm. No, not like that. I don't think there's a body buried at the old farm. I think he was fired and immediately removed from the farm. Of course, these are not nice things to talk about Aphrodite, but I just wanted to show you that growing up without proper parental support and care is like trying to swim across a crocodile-infested river, blindfolded, in the dark with hands tied behind your back. The chances of a successful crossing are very small, and even if you make it, you may be missing many body parts and limbs. And good luck trying to recover from that, and fitting in with the rest of society that doesn't understand what you've been through. I wasn't going to tell you this, Aphie, but when I was rummaging in that region of my memory marked sealed, do not open, I found something even more disturbing that I thought I had locked away for good. It was a memory of one night, when aged 8 or 9. It happened during a storm, or it might have been during a particularly bad battle between the Rhodesian army and the ZNLA guerrillas. There were bazooka mortar shells and bombs going off near a place called Ndanga in Selukwi, some distance from the farm in Rockford where I grew up. Aphie, my love, if I could, I would take an axe and chop off my childhood, cut it away like a cancer and bury it so far deep in the ground, it could not be found until hell freezes over. Then life would be so sweet. But alas, the demons created in those formative years refused to be silenced. We slept with only a reed mat, separating us from the cold hard cement floor, 7 or 8 people to a room, including a couple of maids. That night as battle raged on in the distance, and mortar shells exploded like thunder each time, light flashing into the room creating ominous shadows, one of the maids had other ideas. Waiting for everyone to fall asleep, she sidled up to me and did terrible unspeakable things to me, and made me do terrible unspeakable things to her. The ordeal lasted so long, and after, my face and body was a sloppy, slimy mess. I was exhausted and vowed never to do anything like that ever again. She obviously relished it so much that she tried it again the next night. But that time was caught red-handed and I never saw her again after that. It was a real shame because other than that, she was really a nice person, pretty and all that too. But as you shall see later, this was not to be my last run-in with a maid. The last one was to have devastating consequences on my life.
Letter 8. The end of the war. Aphrodite, do you think that the universe can punish us for the things we haven't done yet? I mean, is it possible that all those bad things that happened to me in '79 were some sort of divine retribution for the pain I was going to cause you years later? The universe knows our past, present, and future, so I guess if it figures out that it's going to be too busy with other matters at some point in our future, and it has some spare time now, then it takes care of doling out the punishment now rather than later. Never mind. Just a thought. If grade 6 in '79 had been my darkest hour, grade 7 in 1980 was my nirvana. Our amazing teacher Mr. Mashenge had moved up with us all the way from grade 5 through grade 6 and was with us in our final year in grade 7. We were the seniors, right at the top of the food chain. Oh, how far I had come in 7 years, Aphrodite. You'd have been proud of me if you had been on that long journey with me all the way from grade 1 at Rockford and now grade 7 at Senga Primary School. So much had happened, so much water under the bridge, darling. Felt like I had been alive for 100 years. I saw Mr. Mashenge smile for the first time in years as he explained his plans for us for that year and how he would coach us to help us pass the national paper at the end of the year. Our grades from the paper would decide whether we'd be accepted in a secondary school of our choice, like Fletcher High School or the famous Gormanzi High School, that every African kid in the country dreamed of going to. Of course, I was not interested in Gormanzi or Fletcher. I had my eyes set on Chaplin High School, a white school of such fame it literally made one's mouth water to hear about. My cousin was going there and he had so many amazing stories to tell of the games and sports they played there, and I wanted in. Since my cousins were already going there, I didn't think there was going to be a problem. All I had to do was pass the grade 7 national exam and I would get into Chaplin. See how close we're to meeting now, Aphie. Our class was buzzing with energy and you could feel the joy and happiness of every kid in the class. Bully boy Titus was gone and already a long distant memory. Our classroom was at the end of the right arm of the U, if you were facing south. How poignant that was too. There was nothing beyond that classroom after grade 7. So this was the last stop and we had to leave after that. Let me just stop here and contemplate the memory of a school that gave me so much. Thank you Senga Primary School for accepting me as one of your own, teaching me for 3 years and lifting me out of the darkness into the light. The universe giveth and the universe taketh. After a year of taking from me, from the start of 1980, the universe relented and started giving again. I only had to ask and it was granted. My grades started coming back up again and at the end of the first term I came second to the inimitable Paul. This time they gave me a certificate and a prize. The prize was a novel called Jekanika, by Aaron Chandura Moyo, I think. I was so thrilled I immediately started reading it right there and then. It was so thrilling I could not put it down. Only one other novel had done that to me, and it had been another shonen novel called Parsipanadla. Literal translation, The Ground Eats. By the early hours of the next morning I had cried and read, and cried again, and finally finished reading the book. It's a book that I don't want to remember, because it stirred something in me. It awoke the sleeping demons, stirred the unfettered sleeping dragon, and started my slow descent into purgatory. By the early hours of the next morning I had cried and read, and cried again, and finally finished reading the book. It's a book that I don't want to remember, because it stirred something in me. It awoke the sleeping demons, stirred the unfettered sleeping dragon, and started my slow descent into purgatory. I'm sure you're familiar, Aphrodite, with the story of Amadou Hampate Ba who hears from death that he will die in the city of Timbuktu. Afraid of his fate, Amadou flees to Damascus, but to his surprise, he encounters death there as well. When I read Jekanika, my fate was sealed and I had to answer the call of destiny. I told you that I had made a promise to myself never to contact my father again. As far as I was concerned, he had betrayed us and was dead to me. That's why I cried so much when I read Jekanika. I cried for the dark hole I had been in all those years. I cried for the dark hole I would fall into if he didn't want anything to do with us either. I cried because I was tired. I cried because I hurt Aphrodite. I hurt so much you won't believe how much, and that novel had awoken all that pain. I don't exactly know what particular bit did it, and since I will never read that book again and my brain won't allow me to go back to the trigger of the pain, I can't tell you the reason. After finishing Jekanika with great trepidation and shame, I tore a page out of an exercise book and wrote a letter to my father in England. I don't know what I was hoping for, and I really don't want to think about what I said to him. I was being an idiot and I was sure I was going to get burned again. I mailed the letter, and by the time a couple of weeks had gone by, I had forgotten all about it. Life at the plot had changed a great deal in the couple of years since we moved there from Koba. Uncle Ben had added so much land to the plot by purchasing all the surrounding land adjacent to the plot and turned the place into a super mini farm. I reckon he had at least 100 acres of the most fertile land I had ever seen, and it was our job to till the land and grow maize. The work was intense and backbreaking, every single day of the school holidays and on Sundays. Saturdays were church and rest days, and it was back to work at the crack of dawn every morning. Everyone had to work, so it was a fair system. Unfortunately for us, he had every single one of the mulberry trees chopped down and uprooted to make way for growing maize, which was sold fresh and as well as dried to the granaries. So we never got to enjoy the mulberries, even once. Since being sent away to live at the compound, my spirit had been broken, and I had realized that my sister and I were a heavy burden on anyone we stayed with, and that the best place for us was the plot. None of the other relatives were nearly as prosperous and accommodating as Uncle Ben and Mamamdala, so I did not complain, and I worked damned hard at that damned plot. Uncle Ben and Mamamdala also helped many other people, so the house was always full of different relatives. You could say they really had their hands full, and to be quite honest, I have no idea how they managed to feed so many people every day. I guess it went some way that we helped out with growing some of the food we ate. I was strong as an ox back then and could work all day long without breaking a sweat. Don't get me wrong, Aphrodite. Life wasn't always hard. Christmas days were very special, and we just did a couple of hours work in the morning and had the rest of the day free to enjoy some serious gourmet meals. You know, the usual chicken, rice, maize. Do you know that there are so many ways to cook meal? There is the usual sadza. But my favorite was the meal Mamamdala cooked whenever she was in a particularly good mood. It's a dish called mfakoko. I don't actually know the recipe is for certain, but I guess it was something like equal measures of flour and ordinary meal, teaspoon of salt and a cup of sugar, added to a sieve or colander, wrapped in a kitchen towel and steamed whilst shaking the ingredients vigorously every few minutes. This produced a fluffy, powdery, and almost dry mixture. Tip some into a bowl and pour a copious amount of amici, thick sour milk, and eat with a spoon. I swear in all the heavens of all the kingdoms under the sun, there was nothing that tasted as good. It made the ears tingle, and you could hear the universe singing the most joyful song you can imagine. Naturally, when it rained, we also downed tools and could enjoy roasting maize or just play outside in the rain. Once these white boys turned up to play with us. They were neighbors from a plot nearby. I think they were called Clarkson or something like that. One of the boys had an orange or yellow chopper bike. You know, the one with a tiny wheel in front, a big wheel at the back, and fancy handlebars that look kind of like kudu or sable horns. The bike had 5 or 6 speed gears, for crying out loud. We were so intrigued. The mesmerized boy was quite happy for us to try his bike. We took it in turns to go round a 3-mile-so block down past the horse plot and round past all of Uncle Ben's land. What a fun day that was, and even when it started pouring again with rain, with thunder and lightning, we were undeterred and carried on riding. I think those boys got told off by the parents for playing with African kids, because we never saw them again, and not long after, they moved away to South Africa or Australia or God knows, wherever white people went when they left Rhodesia. Other times we downed tools when we had special guests. I always loved it when Anna's family visited us from Koba. Word would get out that Anna was coming, mainly from my cousin Zinal. I don't know if she knew that I had a very special soft spot for Anna, but no sooner had she said it than I would run the bath, clean up real good and put on my Sunday best, well, Saturday best, and wait for Anna to turn up with her family. The first time she came round, we went round showing her and her sister around the house and the plot. I so wanted to get Anna alone by ourselves, so I could declare my love for her, but the chance never arose. Each time they came round, the same thing happened. Every year Anna grew prettier and prettier. Unfortunately, for some reason they stopped coming to the plot and she slowly faded into a happy childhood memory. The universe giveth and the universe taketh. Even when the second term of my grade 7 started, the universe was still doling out gifts from the stars like candy. Soon after we got back to school, all the kids were given so many free goodies we practically didn't know what to do with them. There were green and orange rulers and exercise books with pictures of cockerels and man called Mugabe. There were tons of free exercise books, rubbers and pencils. The heavens had opened up and it was a time of plenty. For the icing on the cake, that term we were also joined by a very pretty girl called Teresai. I had never heard that name before, and it belonged to an extraordinarily beautiful girl with flawless dark brown skin. Her eyes were like obsidian and she walked like a princess, as if the wind carried her forward and the trees and bushes bowed down and said, "Your Highness," as she walked past. I was 12 years by then, no longer a child, so appreciated beauty when I saw it. I had not really paid any attention to any of the girls at Senga until Teresai arrived. If school had been 100% interesting, it went from there to about 10 times as much. No, 100 times as much. Every boy in class was after this rare gem, and we vied to impress her in so many ways for her to notice us. I had recently found an old bicycle that had belonged to my cousin Mandla in one of the rooms of the boys' kaya. That was being used for storage at the plot. It was a broken up and worthless piece of junk. But I had spent every penny I had fixing it up and had got it working again. So was riding it to school instead of taking the bus. So to impress Teresai, I would make sure she was walking back up the road towards Senga Township to take the bus, and I would ride past her so fast and show off a little bit, hoping she would think I was wonderful and fall in love with me and marry me one day. If she noticed, she didn't show it. She was a cool customer and didn't respond to anything. She also turned out to be very bright and gave Evelyn and I a run for our money for second and third position of the second term. I don't think I ever had a better year in school than that last year of primary school in 1980. Maybe grade 3 with Mrs. Chimedza at Rockford years before came anywhere near. Mr. Mushenge was driving us hard. But no matter how hard we worked, he always said we're way too far behind on the syllabus and we were not going to be able to finish it on time. So he piled extra work on us. Really, it was not that hard. It was more reading, more maths, and I was already way ahead in that department, having already read so many books including the dictionary back to front. It was not long after the start of the second term, when one morning during the woodwork class, there was a loud knock on the classroom door. It sounded urgent, so all the hammering and chiseling stopped. The woodwork teacher hurriedly marched to the door and pushed it open. Mr. Mushenge said something to the woodwork teacher so quickly, but I couldn't work out what was said. Mr. Shoko, the woodwork teacher, calmly walked back in and stood looking at us. He was a very dark man, but that morning his face was glowing like a saint. He had a smile on his face like an innocent child. "Boys, we did it. The war is over. We won. We're free," he said, punching the air with both arms. Pandemonium broke in the whole classroom. Boys were up on the workbenches, stamping their feet and screaming for joy as loud as they could. We were banging the workbenches with mallets. We were hugging and shaking each other's hands. It was the happiest moment of any kid's life I had ever witnessed. There are just no words to describe the look of joy on the faces of those boys that morning. Soon after, the whole school was called to assembly. The headmaster gave a speech during which the old Rhodesian flag was taken down and folded to be put away forever. The new Zimbabwean flag we all know and love was raised. The headmaster explained the design of the flag and what each color meant. Green, the color of our fertile lands. Yellow, the color of all the wealth of our lands. Black, the color of our people. White, the color of peace among all citizens regardless or race or tribe. Red, the color of the blood of all those we lost in the war. It was a touching speech, and by the end some teachers and kids including myself were weeping as I remembered my old school. Mrs. Chimedza and misery we faced after we ran like refugees from the farm. Now we were free. The headmaster said something about white people. But by then my mind was frazzled. The adrenaline had died down and I wasn't paying attention. He did dismiss the school so we could go home and celebrate with our families. What a happy day that was, Aphrodite. How did you celebrate that day, my love? I cycled back from Senga with a couple of boys that had moved to the plots near us. We had to cycle past the hilltop suburb, and as we passed one house we noticed a ripe fruit tree. One of the boys said, "Hey guys, since we won the war and this is our country now, we can take what we want, right?" We debated it for all of 2 seconds. Communism and sharing everything was mentioned, and the decision was, yes, we won the war and we could take anything we wanted from white people but not from black people. There was not much logic there. But we went ahead and leaned our bikes against the fence and climbed over the fence. Nobody thought to check the gate for the beware of the dogs or Basopo Loinja sign. We were so focused on the fruit tree we didn't stop to think. We walked onto the yard unopposed and climbed the tree and started picking the fruits and gorging ourselves on them. Really enjoying a nice picnic al fresco up in the air. I can't tell you what type of fruit tree it was, because I had never had that type of fruit before. I think it might have been an ornamental tree of some sort. But how were we to know that? We had our fill unopposed and were just coming down the tree when a blue pickup truck pulled up right next to the tree, and a white man got out and approached us. He was as tall as the tree we'd been climbing, with a head as big as the car he had just got out of. I think we must have looked the size of ants from his height, and I was sure if he had wanted to, he could have just lifted his boot and squashed all 3 of us like cockroaches. "What are you little Kaffirs doing in my yard?" he bellowed angrily. Calling someone a kafir is like calling them a nigger, and is highly offensive. I stepped in front of the boys I was with. I was blind with rage. There was no way this boar was going to insult us. Like that. Not after what we'd gone through and L won the war. I wanted him dead. I eyed him fearlessly and said, "We are communists. This is our country now and we can take whatever we want." "Sure. Take whatever you want," he barked. His tone relaxed but tinged with dangerous threat. "Do you want me to set these dogs on you as well?" He glanced behind him, and as if on cue, 2 dogs stuck their heads out of the windows on either side of the truck. They were the dogs that us Africans called the big black skinny dogs with pointy ears. Yeah, those ones Aphie, the most feared dog. Second only to its cousin the German Shepherd. But I would rather die by Alsatian than by pointy-eared dog. They can work together like geniuses, chase down a man and tear him to shreds. I had seen it on TV. And, if you know one thing, it's that back then years of Rhodesian police violence on African people using Alsatians had made Africans so terrified of dogs that seeing those Doberman pinschers immediately kicked the communist out of my overgrown bloated chest. "No!" we cried, backing away slowly. I think one of my friends peed himself right there and we turned and ran out of the gate as fast as our feet could carry us. Outside the fence we pushed our bikes running until we were out of the sight of that house. Needless to say, I never went past that house again in the rest of the year at Senga Primary. I think most Africans after independence expected to see hordes of white Rhodesians lining the length of Bulawayo Road on their way to South Africa, leaving the country for good, but that's not what happened. The exodus took at least a couple years and was a steady trickle rather than a mass exodus. The second term after independence went so quickly it wasn't long before Mr. Mushenge stood in front of the class and explained that we'd have to come to class over the holidays to work on the syllabus. He explained that we would not need to wear school uniforms when we did. I thought that was so cool. No uniform at school. We worked on so many maths problems and essays that even I, who wasn't a particular fan of maths, enjoyed it a bit. Something that defied understanding happened that summer. A boy, fat boy, really sweet fat boy called Oliver, who had been the class clown and scoring last at everything, suddenly switched from being the worst to at everything to being absolutely the cleverest, especially at mathematics. He was scoring 100% on all the papers and doing so well that Mr. Mushenge asked him to go around helping anyone who was having trouble understanding anything. I asked Oliver how he had suddenly become so good at maths, and he explained that his much older brother had taken him to see Nanga, who had given him a charm bracelet and explained that all he had to do was to work hard and believe in himself, and he could become anything he wanted to be, a doctor, a teacher, or a pilot. He explained that he and his brother had gone over every question in the textbook and he understood it all. It was really fascinating to see such an improvement, and I think it really spurred us all to work harder. That grade 7 class of 1980 at Senga was the best group of kids I ever went to school with. I consider myself incredibly fortunate to have shared my life with them. One evening, quite out of the blue, Uncle Ben called me aside and I was immediately afraid, because that always meant some terrible news or some tectonic rip in the fabric. However, all he did was hand over a letter to me and say, "I think this is from your father in England." I had completely forgotten about the letter I had written to him all that while back. I took the letter to the bedroom, which I shared with my cousins, opened the letter, hands shaking as I read the contents. I had to sit down on the bed and weep uncontrollably. They were not tears of sadness. They were tears of joy, Aphrodite. My father had actually said that he was very touched by my letter and was very happy to hear from me and he would help. If I needed anything, I only had to ask, and he had signed the later with "your dad." But wait a minute, there was another letter in the envelope, and this one was from my stepmother. She too had said really kind things in her letter, and signed the letter with "your mum," not "your stepmother." I was blown away. There I was, 12 years old, having all but given up all hope, and finally had a mum and dad for the first time in my life. It was like being bathed in a shower of light, Aphrodite. For a moment I felt the weight of the world lifted off my shoulders. There was a kind of happiness and sense of freedom that infused every part of my body right down to the toes of my feet. If you said I was a slow learner, Aphrodite, my love, you wouldn't be wrong. I was a slow learner, because I hadn't learned that sooner or later the universe would have to come collecting taxes for all those gifts it had given me. Somewhere in the vast cosmos, the knives were being sharpened and the sword of Damocles was already dangling over my head. Meanwhile, though, the universe kept giving profusely, lulling me into a false sense of security. We went back to school for the final term of grade 7 at Senga Primary School to write the final year grade 7 paper and hopefully graduate to a new life. Unfortunately, Aphrodite, I can't tell you anything about that last term because I don't remember anything about it. Once again, the emotional overload of the previous month had fried a part of my brain, and all memories of that time were permanently lost to history. December of 1980 came so quickly it felt like the shortest year of my life, and before I knew it, it was school holidays and I was back working at the plot from dawn till dusk. It was during this time that news started coming from Uncle Ben that my father would be coming home from England that Christmas. Everyone was so excited about seeing the stranger who had been gone for more than a decade. I was ecstatic, and so was my sister in her own quiet way. I was sure once he was home, all the suffering we had endured would simply melt away. The day finally came and my dad arrived at the plot to a resounding welcome and fanfare. It was a real exciting and emotional meeting, but also very happy. No sooner than my dad had come than he was gone back to England and life returned to a new normal. It wasn't long after my dad had gone back to England that there was a rip in the fabric of spacetime and the universe unleashed its vile tax collectors on me. I think it was the beginning of 1981. So you believe you had a splendid year, did you? You had your share of merriment, yeah? The universe's tax collectors sneered with venom in their voices. I had applied for a space at Chaplin High School and a letter duly arrived offering me a place. I was so thrilled. But the entrance forms had to be signed by a parent or guardian. It was the first time I had come across the word guardian in the context that referred to me. I thought it was quite demeaning to my uncle and Mamamdala, to be honest. They had been much more than guardians to me. They had been the only real parents I had ever had. Guardian just didn't cut it. But regardless, I proudly went to ask Uncle Ben to sign the form. Uncle Ben signed the form. But the look on his face and what he said after shocked me to the core. Blood drained from my veins and I shriveled to a white ghost. He wanted to know why I had applied to go to Chaplin High School and not Fletcher High School without consulting him. He said he thought we'd drive together every morning on his way to work and he'd drop me at Fletcher High. Firstly, Fletcher High wasn't exactly on his way, and secondly, in all the years I had gone to Senga Primary School, he had only ever given me a lift there once. The day of the interview all those years back. Senga Primary School was right on the road to Gweru Teachers College. Why would he suddenly want to go out of his way and give me a lift to Fletcher High School? His kids were going to Chaplin High School. So was I not good enough to be in the same school as them? My brain suddenly retorted violently. I blocked the thoughts flooding my head at that moment as fast as they were popping in and out at the speed of light. No. Faster than the speed of light. But poisonous thoughts kept coming. They would come when I wasn't watching, they would come in nightmares, and they would come in fits of despair. A realization that something had been wrong all along. And I was filled with an overwhelming sense of guilt and shame. Oh my love, Afy. This was too much for me. Even a 13-year-old brain couldn't deal with such betrayal. Yet it wasn't his fault, it was all my fault. If I had never been born, that conversation would never have needed to take place. All the years of pretense would never have had to happen. No man or woman can take care of somebody else's kids like their own. And they shouldn't have to. It's not natural. I really wished I had never been born then.